Safekey.
Good afternoon and welcome to Burt News and Views. I'm your host, Don Burgess. And with us today, we're very privileged to have a very refreshed premier, David Burt. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Don. Good to see you.
Want to start off, we have some questions from some viewers, but we also have some questions from ourselves, in particular with the union and the industrial protest that's going on. VIU President Chris Ferbert stated on Tuesday that the PLP have been disinvited to speak at Labor Day. Has this happened, and what's your reaction to the Labor Party not being able to give a speech at the rally?
Well, as is my understanding, the government speaks, and I'm uncertain if that's been officially communicated, and if that is the case, that would be unfortunate, as I know that there's a joint Labor Day organizing committee, and Labor Day is organized by all the unions in the country. But what I will say is that as a Labor Party, I've marched in every Labor Day march since I have been not only a leader, but since I've been in the legislature, and even when I was chairman of the Progressive Labor Party when I was on island, and I will intend to participate as part of the march, because I think it's important that we celebrate the progress of which we made in labor. The Bermuda Industrial Union and the labor movement is important to Bermuda. It's important to me. It's important to my family. And it's important to the Progressive Labor Party family. And though we may have disputes from time to time, that does not mean that we do not support the cause of workers and the advancement of workers' rights, which is what we have done in many cases and instances since we have been elected in 2017. Look at extended maternity leave benefits, look at sexual harassment rules inside the workplace, look at the work in which we've done in strengthening the unions to create automatic agency shops to make sure we get rid of the free rider problems. There's so many improvements which we made for labor, and so we will celebrate them.
Yeah. There were a few PLP MPs at last Tuesday's protests, including Derek Burgess and Zane De Silva. Mr. Ferbert said that he had additional support from at least 2 or 3 other MPs. How much of a split has this issue caused amongst the ranks?
I wouldn't say so much as a split. I think I was asked a similar question yesterday. When you have a blessing of 30 members of the House of Assembly, sometimes it can also manifest as a curse. And the fact is that the Progressive Labor Party is a diverse party where we have people from different views. And I do not expect that all 30 of the members of the House of Assembly will agree on every issue. That is just not possible. And so from this perspective, there are some views, but at the end of the day, what is most important in this situation is that the Progressive Labor Party government did not change the rules on decertification. The rules on decertification have been the same that they have been since they were brought into effect in May of 2000 under the first Progressive Labor Party government. There has been no change. If anything, it would be considered a strengthening of the provisions against decertification. So the view of which I have stated in the communication which I sent to the leadership of the Bermuda Industrial Union is that this is not an issue to withdraw labor. This is an issue which has been long-standing. What the government has done is in line with International Labor Organization norms. And what we're saying is that people who pay fees have a right to vote for who represents the workplace. That was the position before this was put in place, and that is the position after. There are no differences between who could vote before and who could vote after. So there is no change. And so the fact that there is a movement to try to get the government to change something when the government changed something back, or to fix something that we didn't break, I think is a challenge. But we will continue to repeat the message that there has been no change, and it is unfortunate that this has caused this particular issue and challenge. But from our perspective, we believe that we have taken a very principled position that any individual who contributes money out of their paycheck towards a union should have a right to vote as to whether or not that union will continue to represent them, or whether or not they want to be represented by someone else.
But Mr. Ferbert would argue that there has been a change, and it's a major issue to them, obviously, with the 2 protests this week and a proposed scheduled weekly protest going forward.
Don, there has been no change, and the president of the union will not say that there's been a change. What the president of the union wants is a change to what has been the long-standing policy since 2000, which is not supported by the International Labor Organization and is not supported by the Constitution. We cannot be denying the rights of individuals to vote. I mean, a corollary to this would be in a general election in the country that we say the only people who have the ability to vote are those people who are PLP members. That doesn't work. If it is a workplace ballot, it is not a union ballot. It is the people inside the workplace who are paying their fees deciding whether or not they want to be represented collectively or not. But the protections for decertification are incredibly strong. It will basically require a majority of union members to say they no longer want the union to represent them. That's why decertifications are incredibly rare, and they will continue to be rare underneath the protections that have been put in place.
Okay. Moving on to COVID, because I have a question before we get on to the reader ones. That's what they seem the most interested in. Some gym owners have banded together, formed a coalition, and stated they are not going to use Safekey. What has government done in response to this?
Well, I just got back to the office yesterday. We do have some meetings on the coronavirus tomorrow and on Friday. I haven't heard that. What I would say is I would encourage everyone to follow the law. We certainly have an escalating situation with increasing local transmission, mainly amongst unvaccinated persons. And I think that it is important that we take protections. The last thing that I think a gym wants to do is to find themselves closed down or transmission inside of their workplace due to the fact of not following the very sense of precaution which have been put in place. I did speak to the Minister of Health earlier today, and she has maintained to me that Safekey has been effective as it has caught a number of community cases. And if we can imagine that these persons who would have been unvaccinated will be entering establishments, indoor dining, bars, and parties, we could find ourselves with increased transmission, which is what we're trying to avoid. But I think the most important thing to recognize is that as a country, as many countries have seen, that an elimination strategy is impossible with the Delta variant. And so what we are going to have to make sure that we do is that we are going to have to make sure that we take the precautions where we can. Everyone in the country who has the ability to be vaccinated should talk to their doctor and get that protection. The fact is that if you are vaccinated and if you do contract the coronavirus infection, it is highly unlikely that you'll get severely ill and or die. And that's what's most important. We want to protect against the overwhelming of the healthcare system. And we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that the gym owners had was the unwieldiness of the PCR testing, in that, if you look today, you're booking a week out because the next available appointment's next Thursday. That's all. So like if somebody wanted to go to the gym, they're constantly having to book in advance. And even then, you're only allowed to book every 4 days. So, and the Safekey is only available good for 3 days. So there's a gap there as well.
That is something that is being discussed in regards to possible extension of the validity of those things. And so that's actually on an agenda item for a meeting that we're having later today. But I think it's important that what we must recognize is that we have increasing local transmission of the Delta variant here on the island. The government is not considering shutting down things and all the rest, but we're putting in place sensible precautions which will minimize transmission. The fact is that if we have significant local transmission, we have to recognize that there are persons who cannot be protected from the virus yet, such as children under the age of 12. And it's important that we make sure that we protect them, protect the families, and make sure that we are limiting the transmission on island. And so the use of Safekey has proven to be effective, and we should continue to support it. Okay. Because the alternatives, of course, are closing down gyms and bars, which I have no desire to do whatsoever. Okay. Commerce must continue. People must continue to work. People must continue to live. And we must live, and as I say, move beyond the pandemic and focus on the issues of repairing the economy and also making sure that we help people in their lives.
Mr. Premier, OBA leader Cole Simon said earlier this year, the Premier extended his emergency powers to manage the pandemic during the post-state of emergency. If we are still in a state of emergency, why has the Premier been on holiday and absent, and why have cabinet meetings been suspended? What is your response to this?
Our response is, as usual, the opposition leader is misinformed. And it's unfortunate. He could have asked me himself. Cabinet meetings have not been suspended. The cabinet did not meet this week. The cabinet did meet last week in the month of August. We're meeting every other week. I chaired a cabinet meeting 2 weeks before I left. I was on vacation. The acting premier chaired a cabinet meeting that took place last week. Well, next week, Tuesday, we go back to weekly meetings. We reduce the schedule as a lot of members are on vacation, and I've encouraged ministers to take vacation and to disconnect, because ministers have been going at a very fervent pace since last year, May. And what I want to make sure is that we are refreshed and recharged for the work ahead for a parliamentary session that's happening in September, and as we move forward towards the throne speech and to our next parliamentary session. So the opposition leader is misinformed. The cabinet has not been suspended, and business continues.
Okay. Well, earlier today, Burn News took some viewer questions, and we have those for you. Moving on to the first one. Do the policies of mandatory hotel quarantine and Safekey work, given that we now have over 200 active cases? Will you consider implementing stronger measures at the border by imposing mandatory quarantine on both vaccinated and unvaccinated travelers?
The answer to the question is I do believe that the mandatory hotel quarantine policies work. I certainly do believe that our border policies are appropriate and are risk-based. They will certainly need to be looked at as we see the waning effectiveness of vaccines over time and what that looks like. And so those are, of course, parts of discussions that will continue. But here's something that's very important to remember. The Delta variant was on island before mandatory hotel quarantine went into effect. And I don't want people to forget that. And it's an unfortunate thing because we were not able to get it implemented until June 20th. There was the court filing and then the possibility of an injunction. So we had to make sure that we waited through that process, the correct legal process. But I do believe that the border policies that we have in place are appropriate. And the challenge that we have is local transmission. And a lot of this local transmission is coming from people not taking base precautions. If you are sick and going into the workplace, that is not okay. If you test positive and you are required to quarantine, you do get support from the government for that. And I want people to remember that particularly. Being sick and going to workplaces is causing additional challenges.
Right. Now, I know a lot of people have been asking about why not or vaccinated people have to do a 4-day quarantine and wait till after their 4-day test.
That's fine, but that's not the policy which we have. We believe that the policies are appropriate. We recognize it at the border, and the statistics show, I think the last measure was, I think that unvaccinated persons are 10 times more likely to test positive at the border. We do know that persons who do test positive, who are vaccinated, are far less likely to spread. The spread of which we're seeing are in close household settings, such as husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, those type of things versus, regular community items. So we believe that the protections and precautions that we have in place are appropriate to make sure that we can continue life inside of this country while not enacting harsh shutdowns. And as I say, adjustments, not interruption of lives.
One of the things that you were talking about in that question was the waning efficacy of the vaccines. And I believe like at Pfizer right now, they're saying it's between 42 and 46%. With the Delta variant, is Bermuda looking at having a booster shot?
I think the Minister of Health in the press statement that was put out on Tuesday night said that I don't know the exact title of the committee, but it's the committee that advises on vaccinations for Bermuda. And the Minister of Health did say that they are looking at the issue. And when they are able to, come to a conclusion that will be shared. But I don't believe that a decision has been made yet. But as I had indicated also that we have meetings on the coronavirus later this afternoon and also tomorrow. So I'll have a fuller briefing and update of where those things stand.
Okay, thank you. The next question from a Burners reader is, would you support what many are doing in New York and other hubs, such as requiring workers to show proof of vaccination to stay employed? There are large multinational corporations in Bermuda, so perhaps it's already on the cards, but I've not read about it.
The position of the government of Bermuda currently as it stands is that vaccination is a choice between an individual and their doctor, and we do not believe that it would be fair or right to deny people, especially in general items, the ability to work. That's the position right now. I don't know if that will be reviewed or changed in the future, but that's the position right now. And I do not believe that's something that the government has said is a personal choice between someone and their doctor should be held against some employment status. Now, that does not mean that in specific circumstances and instances that there should not be more enhanced testing to ensure. But I think what is important is to continue, and the government has always said a person should speak to their doctor. I go out to the community and people say, what about the vaccine? What do you say? My response is speak to the doctor. What did your doctor say? That's most important, because the government is not here to give health advice. The government is here to facilitate the management of a public health situation throughout a pandemic. But individual persons should have that conversation with their doctor. And the vast majority of doctors in the country certainly will recommend it. But there are certain cases where people may have certain contraindications where they are advised not to. And that is why it's important to protect those persons who cannot be vaccinated.
So if a multinational corporation decides that all their employees have to be vaccinated, how will Bermuda respond to that?
Anything that would have to be in line with our local laws. So it doesn't matter what multinational corporations do. Everything that multinational corporations do have to be in line with local laws.
Okay, thank you. The next question from a Burn News reader is, why does the travel authorization form state that the unvaccinated residents need to quarantine for 14 days at the hotel facility instead of the new mandate of 4 days with a pretest?
It could be likely that that website has not yet been updated. There's a lot of changing things, so lots of different websites to update, but I thank the viewer for their question. I'm sure that my team who's in office with me here has taken notes, and we'll go ahead and get that adjusted. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
The next question from a Burn News reader is, how long will Safekey be in effect? How safe is it? And I think you've answered this a little bit, but when the vaccinated simply renew it online without a COVID test, yet unvaccinated need a test every 72 hours. Vaccinated people can also get the virus and pass it on.
That's a question that's been asked before, and I think that it's important to recognize that, and I got a little bit of flack for this earlier on, but there is a coronavirus infection, which is the infection of SARS-CoV-2. And then there is coronavirus disease, COVID, which is the disease caused by the coronavirus when you might, have difficulty breathing, coughing, etc. Vaccinated persons who contract the virus or the infection are far less likely to spread. And our experience has shown that that is the case. And the experience we've shown is extended close contact settings. In this case, for instance, we believe what we put in place is appropriate. If we do wish to adjust and change, which we may need to do given the waning efficacy of vaccines, we may make those changes. But right now, what we believe that we have in place is safe and appropriate. And we've seen instances such as cut match, such as large events over cut match, where we have not seen transmission from Safekey events.
Okay. The next question from a reader is, in light of the large number of positive cases we currently have on island, do you encourage working remotely where possible to avoid unnecessary transmission in the office?
I don't know if the government's made a distinctive position on that. As I said, that we're going to have meetings on the coronavirus today and tomorrow, so there may be further things that may come out from the government due to the increase in cases which we're seeing, which, as I repeat, are mainly local transmission amongst unvaccinated persons here on island. What I will state, however, is that it's important that workplaces take the precautions which are necessary and follow the rules. And it's important that workplaces do not let people come to work when they're sick. And so if individual workplaces want to protect themselves by encouraging persons to work remotely, that's on them. But we in the government make sure that we take specific precautions to prevent transmission in the workplace. And I would encourage all employers to do the same things, to follow the guidance which has been put in place on the government website.
Right. Another viewer asked, why is a 2-week mandatory quarantine coming from my vacation pay? It should come from quarantine pay or sick pay. Please fix this.
I'm not entirely certain what the individual is speaking about. If they're speaking about if they've tested positive on island or have been required to quarantine, that is covered by the government. But persons who travel, who return back to the island, that is not covered by the government.
Okay. That was it for our viewer questions. I still have a few more for you, though.
Go right on ahead, Don. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah.
As I said, I'm refreshed.
Recent weekly data from the CD shows that 22.4% of COVID cases were in children under the age of 18, with more of them being hospitalized due to the Delta variant. What can you say to parents to allay their concerns as public school begins next week?
I believe that our public schools will be safe. What is important is that we maintain the screening protocols that are in place and the safety protocols that are in place. It's interesting. I saw some, I would say, chatter online earlier regarding, of course, a headline from our daily newspaper which said something about masks required in school. The rules on mask wearing in schools have not changed since schools have gone back in. They are the same rules for persons in P4 or higher. So I find it difficult that individuals, are making that distinction. But I think what's important is that we will take the precautions in school. We do have a very good system that we do have in schools, but I am worried that we do see transmission, which is taking place amongst children who aren't able to be vaccinated. And it's going to be important that the rules and precautions are followed, and people are responsible by not sending their children to school if they may be unwell. And we do have the screening protocols in place, and we'll be looking to find out what additional screening protocols we can make or make available to make it easier for persons. But it is vital that we are able to keep our schools safe. The two things that I say are my priorities when it comes to the government's actions on the coronavirus are saving lives and keeping our kids in school. That's what's important.
Okay. I did mention earlier that recent data that was published in Bloomberg suggests that the efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine is only 42 to 46% with the Delta variant, and that people who have recovered from COVID appear to have a lower risk of contacting the Delta variant than those who've had 2 doses of the Pfizer. Matter of the research is showing that it's the people with the Pfizer vaccine are 5 or 6 times more likely than somebody who's already had COVID. So why isn't Bermuda checking for people to see if they have the COVID antibodies?
That's not a question I can answer, and I say from the perspective, I don't know what studies and what you're doing, but in regards to the antibody question, it's a question that will be discussed because it's been raised a few times, just like the monoclonal antibody cocktail treatment thing that's on our agenda to discuss later today. I think that the CMO was asked in a press conference in July the questions about immunity from vaccine versus immunity from infection and the different things there. But of course, if there's any studies or various things, I'm sure the CMO and the medical team are aware of them, and certainly happy for those specific technical questions to be posed at a technical level. But I wouldn't be able to specifically answer that. Sorry.
Swinging back to union issues, with the major impasse between the government and the BIU, where do you see room for a solution?
Well, I want to reframe that because I would find it difficult to say that the major impasse between the government and the Bermuda Industrial Union. I do believe on this issue, and as I've said and repeated before, I love the Bermuda Industrial Union. The Bermuda Industrial Union has a very proud history. The Bermuda Industrial Union has been a bulwark for rights in this country that has been before there was a progressive Labour Party government that made sure that people had fair pay, fair working conditions, and it is an important part of what is the fabric of workers for Bermudians. So I do not take any pleasure and do not enjoy the fact that we are currently at a dispute over something that I do not believe should be in dispute, as the law has not changed for 21 years. With all of that being said, it is my hope that the Bermuda Industrial Union will return to the agreement which was signed in December, to work with the Ministry of Labor to agree the guidelines to the certification process, which I'm certain will address and allay the concerns that the leadership of the Bermuda Industrial Union has. The government has no desire to weaken the union. This union legislation strengthened the union. This particular provision on decertification did not change. It is the same provisions which have been in place since May of 2000 when they were brought into place under the first progressive Labour Party government. And so the thought that the Bermuda Industrial Union will withdraw its support for the government over this particular issue when the provisions were the same in the elections of 2003, 2007, 2012, 2017, and 2020, when the BIU supported the government, does not make logical sense. So that is the reason why the government is trying to not escalate the situation. What we're saying is that we should return to the agreement that we had in December to make sure that we can agree the guidelines so we can put those in law so there cannot be any doubt as protections against decertification. And we are certain that those will be able to address the concerns of the members of, the leadership of the Bermuda Industrial Union.
But I think that's part of the problem. I think having been in enough press conferences with Mr. Ferbert this last week, there's a definite different interpretation of what was agreed to in December, whereas he's been saying like they didn't agree to that.
Well, what was agreed to was to, and it was announced in a joint press conference, that the parties would work on guidelines for the decertification process. And so the Bermuda Public Services Union and the BIU and the government agreed to that. The Bermuda Public Services Union went through that process. The BIU were engaged in that process and came out of that process because what the BIU wanted was changes to the law. And what the government has said is that the changes to the law are not on the table because we believe they are fair and right and just. And it is in keeping with International Labor Organization standards, which are important to ensure that all workers, not just unionized workers, all workers have rights. That is the principle for which the Progressive Labor Party stand, because we support workers and we want workers to be able to freely choose who they want to represent them in the workplace. We prefer that they would be represented by a union, but it is not the government's job to put in place things that will restrict persons' rights on how they can be represented in the workplace. It's a very simple perspective. If you get fees deducted from your salary, you can vote. If you do not get fees deducted from your salary, you cannot vote. That is the same as it was in 2000, and that is the same as it is today. It is a very simple premise, and that is the principal position that the government is sticking to. And we sincerely hope that we can get past this impasse with the leadership of the Bermuda Industrial Union, because as the president of the BIU has said, and the other unions have said, this labor legislation strengthens unions, gives more protections to workers, and is probably the most progressive union legislation that has been put in place in this country's history.
Again, I think Mr. Ferber would say they're only paying a half union share, so they don't get a full vote.
Well, remember, this is not a union vote. This is a workplace vote. Persons are being deducted the same amount from their salary. If the union gets 50% or 100%, that is an individual's choice. But they don't have a choice on how much they get deducted from their salary. So they have a choice as to whether or not they want to be collectively represented or individually represented. And decertification is rare because workers enjoy the privilege of being represented by a union. So I'm not going to get into the back and forth with the union president and the leadership of the Bermuda Industrial Union. In my discussions with the president, I have maintained the position. I have said that we are happy to engage this process of guidelines to make sure they are put in regulation so there is no ambiguity that the protections that the unions seek against employer intimidation, interference, and the protections against triggering a decertification ballot are there, understood, and cannot be manipulated by anyone.
Okay. One last question before I give you a chance for the last word. Some people have asked, some services like buses and ferries were suspended for 2 days this week, and going forward, there's supposed to be protests every week. Will government workers who took part in the gathering on Monday, Tuesday be paid, and those going forward who take part in protests be paid?
No, they will not.
Okay, thank you.
And that has been made clear by the head of the public service. I asked that question and clarified it yesterday. I've turned off my email so it doesn't pop up and make noise with the thing. So I was trying to pull it up and see the thing, but I did pose that question because someone had said to me that they had heard something different. I posed the question to the head of the public service, and the head of the public service confirmed to me that those persons will not. If they did not show up for work, they will not be paid.
Okay. And a chance for the last word. Anything you want to say to the Bermuda public?
I'm just happy to be back from vacation. Certainly, it is a time in this country. I certainly sympathize with the challenges which have come about due to this unfortunate impasse between the government and the leadership of the Bermuda Industrial Union. It is my hope that cooler heads will prevail so that we can return to a space where we are focused on the economic recovery of this country. But I'm looking forward to get back to work. And as we move forward, I just want everyone to remember that the coronavirus is still with us. Clearly, it is still with us, and it's important that we take the precautions at all points in time to make sure that we protect ourselves, protect our family, and protect our community.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Premier. We've been very lucky this afternoon to have the interview with Mayor David Burt. We appreciate you being here.
And thank you very much, Don, and I hope your listeners or viewers enjoyed.
Okay, thank you. I've been your host, Don Burgess, and on behalf of Brew News, we're always wishing you a beautiful day.